Theodore Bundy was executed at 7:16.
To the cheers of many and the sorrow of some, Ted Bundy was electrocuted a month ago. His notoriety due not only to the serial killer's rampage, but his almost 10 years on death row.
The Bundy case, people simply don't understand.
They don't understand many have been there as long or longer. Alvin Ford, 14 years on death row for the murder of a Fort Lauderdale police officer. 14 years for Thomas Knight, sentenced to death for the killings of a Miami couple. Robert Patton, 7 years for the death of a Miami police officer. Bernard Bolander, 9 years on the row for the murders of 4 men burned to death on the Golden Glades interchange. In all, 46 men have been on Florida's death row for more than 10 years. 1 man for 15 years.
The case may linger for years and years with no judicial review, and that's simply wrong.
Here's how it works and why it takes time. A conviction in court and the sentence of death. The case automatically reviewed by the Florida Supreme Court. That ruling appealed to the United States Supreme Court, back to the trial court, back again to the Florida Supreme Court. Here, the clock stops until a death warrant is signed. And now, with time running out, the case is brought to the Federal District Court. Its decision appealed to the 11th Circuit Court of Appeals in Atlanta, and that decision filed again with the United States Supreme Court. All this is only the first round.
At that point, somebody else can come in and say, well, wait a minute, all those lawyers who handled your appeals the first time, they weren't good appellate lawyers. Let's try for some new appeals.
The same pattern with the same courts is usually repeated a few more times.
He gets back into death row, and his lawyer, 5 years later, says, well, now I'm going to try this constitutional approach to the problem.
Along the way, there's an appeal for clemency from the governor and stays from judges.
It's not unusual to get the case at 9 or 10 p.m. in the evening with the execution set at 7:01 the next morning.
Years' worth of court records are shipped immediately.
Some of these cases that come in may have a record 2 feet high. You can't decide on somebody's life by just looking at the top of the file and saying, well, it doesn't sound good to me. That file has to be reviewed.
Jason Deaton is on death row and in the process. Convicted almost 5 years ago of strangling a man in Fort Lauderdale, this month he's been in Broward Circuit Court, trying to get his sentence reduced, claiming he had a bad attorney the first time around.
I don't believe this guy's coming back for I think this is the 3rd time.
Metro-Dade Police Department's cold case squad is supposed to solve old murders. Instead, they're spending more and more of their time and money rounding up witnesses and evidence for death row appeal cases.
The case ought to go through the system. Defendants ought to have the right to exhaust every legal remedy afforded to them, but they ought to have to do it in a timely fashion.
If anybody's going to change the approach to it, the Congress has to do it.
Congress might do it. The death penalty is a political issue, and politicians are expected to eventually pass legislation speeding up the process. But until they do, the generally agreed unworkable system stays the way it is. In Miami, I'm Connie Hicks, Channel 10, Eyewitness News.